It's Matt Williams and Kelly O'Keefe back with another cold take from Brand Federation. There has been a lot of interesting stuff going on in the news and the marketing world. And what we want to do is spend a couple of minutes talking about two big stories that have come out in the last 3 or 4 days and finding a thread between them, which I think is really, really interesting. And it's one that lives just below the surface of those stories. So the two stories we want to talk about are the open letter that was to LinkedIn by Starbucks founder Howard Schultz, and then the new Apple ad that has caused such an uproar that introduced their new iPad. So let's talk about both those things, but then let's find a through line that might be very interesting that could connect both. Howard Schultz, the world famous founder of Starbucks, penned an open letter to Starbucks management on the heels of a negative earnings report that came out this week. And he posted it to LinkedIn. And in that post, he gives a lot of very specific feedback for how he thinks the management needs to respond to their earnings miss in terms of the way they change the customer experience and getting back to that kind of third place ethos and supporting the baristas and the people who wear the green apron and making the digital experience more personal and more engaging. He gets very specific and tactical about what he thinks needs to be done. There's a lot to pull apart here. So let's start pulling it apart. Where do you want to start, Kelly?
Well, I think we first have to ask the question about whether or not Howard Schultz should be airing the dirty laundry that he sees with the organization that he ran not once, but twice in public. The fact that he ran it twice is a little bit of a Jay Leno kind of move, like I'm retiring, oh no, I'm back. He appears to be undermining current leadership by chiming in. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know the new coach of Duke basketball, but I'm pretty sure what he doesn't want to do is open the newspaper and find Coach K, who retired this year, commenting about the plays that he should have made without having any understanding of what's going on in the company right now.
It's amazing, isn't it? Anybody who's taken over a company after a long tenured and famous and much loved CEO, speaking from personal experience,
I was just
knows that that's hard to do. And it's complicated immeasurably if that CEO starts, which my predecessor thankfully never did. He was amazing about that transition. But when that CEO starts weighing in publicly about what he or she thinks you should be doing, it makes your life miserable. And it puts you in a really no-win situation. Because if you take their advice, you say to the world that you're basically impotent in your position and you're just going to do whatever your predecessor says. So he undermines your power that way. If you don't take his advice, then the story becomes the disconnect between you and that famous predecessor. And either one of those outcomes is bad. So whether Howard Schultz is right or not, which we can talk about as a second topic of this conversation.
Sure.
He could be 100% right, but what he's done is put his successor as the CEO of Starbucks in a horrible position.
No question. I think, Howard, look, you virtually created the market for high-end coffees and related products, including whatever pumpkin spice crap that is on the menu today. But you have created this, and it's spread, and it's grown, and you should feel proud, and you should retire with that pride. But I'm going to use the famous words of the Disney song, Let It Go.
Don't sing. Please don't sing.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not going to go there. Let it go, Howard, because really, first of all, if you need to provide advice to the leadership, then you can always pick up the phone and do that. You don't have to do it in public.
Right. Yeah.
And second, it's a very complicated marketplace that they're living in now. And it's not the marketplace that you were living in or operating in while you were a leader. And so the circumstances have changed. This company needs to grow up. And it's like having one of those kids. I have 4 kids. They get to a point as a teenager where they need to become their own thing. And you want them to be a child forever. Let it go.
It's got to be tempting to use the platform that a guy like Howard Schultz has to talk about his beloved creation of Starbucks. So you have to understand the psychology of that at one point. But I couldn't agree more that, you know what, if he wants to call the CEO of Starbucks, that he's going to take that call, right? If somebody walks into his office and says Howard's on the phone, whatever he's doing, he's going to stop to talk to Howard. So Howard has an open line of communication to Starbucks, and he needs to have those conversations in private, not in public. There's just no good outcome here. So let's transition into the second part of the conversation, which is, do we think what he's doing is right? What he wants to do is right? So a lot of Howard Schultz's recommendations in his LinkedIn letter revolve around this idea of kind of getting back to this idea of the third place and personalizing the experience, supporting the baristas, making the digital experience more engaging. Starbucks is a fascinating case of a brand that has evolved along with a market that has also evolved. And as they've done that together, they've dramatically changed. So if you think about how Starbucks started, it started as this third place where people could go and hang out and drink a cup of coffee and kind of chill out and be together and socialize. But coffee consumption's changed, and it changed to the point where so much of Starbucks' business is driven by people who don't want to go there and hang out. They want to grab the biggest pot of pumpkin spice latte they can on their way to work. This is not a third place. This is a drive-through. And as that business changes, the nature of this brand fundamentally changes. So I think there's a really interesting strategic conflict in there.
Yeah, and I think the reason that they've moved more and more toward that almost fast food model, where they're expanding significantly their drive-throughs, where they're expanding their highway side locations, it starts to feel a little bit more like a McDonald's or a Dunkin'. And guess what? McDonald's and Dunkin' are their biggest competitors out there right now, because McDonald's has stepped up its coffee game, and Dunkin' always had a great coffee game. And they are providing a fast food-like experience to consumers who just want to get their fill of caffeine, feed that addiction, feed it quickly, and get on with their day. That other persona of Starbucks, because it does have a little bit of a schizophrenic persona right now, that sort of, we're the third place, we're a quaint little coffee shop where you can open your laptop and meet with friends. That need is increasingly being filled by independents who are growing at a rapid pace in every market. And they are cooler, they are funkier, they are more warm and accommodating. Their foods are more local and fresh. Their coffee is often ground locally. It's going to be hard for Starbucks to go backwards and compete with the legion of independents that are filling that role.
It's a really hard place to be in. And there's a competitive pinch going on where they're getting beaten up on the drive-through side by McCafe and Dunkin' Donuts, who are selling it just as fast, but a lot cheaper, and it's pretty good. And then on the other side, like you said, you've got the local third places that are jumping up and doing that third place thing in a more authentic, hipper, cooler way, which third place people value than Starbucks ever could, because Starbucks has outgrown that. So it'll be interesting to see which direction they go. We looked at some statistics about the growth of independent coffee shops. They're going to grow at 7.5% over the next 10 years. This is an interesting pinch that Starbucks has. What it's got is ubiquity that those local stores don't have. And if they can provide an experience in terms of quality and service that can walk that line between the third place and the speed that the fast food people want, they've got ubiquity over both sides. They've got a quality advantage and a status advantage over the fast food, and they can still maintain a little bit of that third place. So if I look at it, I'm saying if there's a proportional kind of weight between those two sides of the Starbucks brand, I'm starting to lead more toward the fast food volume and trying to maintain the status advantage I have, the quality advantage, so that I can keep that premium pricing, but acknowledging that the thing I built, if I'm Howard Schultz, that I fell in love with and ran for 40 years, is not the thing that Starbucks needs to be anymore. And the more he comes out and says, hey, let's go back to what we were, the harder it becomes for the CEO who succeeded him to make the transition that they might need to make. It's really hard.
That's really wise. And I think this is a common brand story. You start out and you're the antagonistic small brand, always more cool than the big guys, trying to carve your way into a territory by sticking it to the man. And if you are successful, you become the man.
Right.
And all of a sudden, other people are sticking it to you. And that's just a natural maturity process that happens with companies.
It's a tough place, but that's a great segue into the second conversation that we want to have. So unless you've been living under a marketing rock, you've seen all the dust up that has happened around Apple's new ad introducing their new iPad. And it's the ad where they take all those old means of creation, like the paints and the piano and the model that artists use to draw human figures, and they put them in this giant industrial press and they smash them down and destroy them, and then open the press to reveal the tiny, cool, new, thin iPad that costs only what, $1,500? Like, it's a crazy expensive. But man, the creative community is not happy with our friends at Apple.
Oh my God. It's one of the saddest commercials I've ever seen. They squeeze down books, and all I can feel is the tears of librarians when I see that ad. Like you see that ad, and everything in it is cool. Ooh,
Right.
paint and easels and metronomes and guitars and pianos. And this is cool. Apple loves cool stuff like that. And then they're like, oh, no, we don't. We're going to squish the crap out of this stuff and just destroy it, because wouldn't you rather have a glassy piece of hardware in your hand to do those things? No, no, God,
Yeah.
no. That's
Right?
not a
Creators,
world
we're
I want to
coming
live
for
in.
everything you love. So get ready,
It was a miss by Apple.
man.
And there is a through line here, Matt, because Apple was also a cool and funky organization. And if Steve Jobs were still alive today, he would be aghast with that messaging, because he celebrated and loved the arts. He cut deals with people like the Beatles because he loved their music. He created opportunities for artists to develop things. And instead of seeing the world as, well, we have all the traditional forms that we used to use with art over here, and we're going to crush the life out of them because this is all you need. I don't think he saw things that way, but Apple is another brand that has matured. It's another brand that's way past adolescence. It's lost a lot of its cool of earlier days. It's lost a lot of its funky innovation that drove us to wait in line for stores. And now it's a big monster in and of itself. And so maybe there's an inevitability of the loss of values that comes with that. I think we have to be careful, because we at Brand Federation really believe there's something about your core DNA you never want to let go, no matter how big you get. And we all look forward to the day that Apple becomes a little bit more of its former self. But it is not this day.
There's a couple of interesting things going on here. I totally agree with you. Like, the idea that they would put an ad out that has this kind of concept in it is a little bit mind-boggling, the same way it was mind-boggling that Pepsi did the thing they did with Kendall Jenner 5 years ago. But I can imagine, right? We both lived in this world and been in these conference rooms and written these briefs. The brief for the Pepsi ad with Kendall Jenner was about Pepsi being the voice of a generation and can be a catalyst for bringing people together. There's nothing inherently wrong with that brief. Just like there's nothing inherently wrong with the brief that I'm sure the Apple iPad ad came from, which is, hey, you can do everything on this iPad. You can create music, you can do drawings, you can paint, you can do anything you want to create, you can create with this piece of technology. The problem came in the creative execution that came out of those briefs. And there's nothing really even inherently wrong with the creative executions, except for the fact that they came from brands that shouldn't be executing those ideas. Pepsi should not show Kendall Jenner using Pepsi to bring people together and solving the Black Lives Matter problem. That's stupid. That's dumb. They can't say that. Nor
Right.
should Apple be able to say, okay, good brief. The way we're going to show how iPad does all these things is to collapse and crush all these old things and combine them into the iPad. If you're Apple, you can't say that, because what people are going to see is not the idea that you can do all these things with the iPad. They're going to see you destroying the old way of working, and they love the old way of working. So even if you were to think about the 1984 ad, the most famous TV ad in the world, because Apple was an upstart and cool, like a challenger brand in the technology world, they could do that ad. They are no longer that. They are now the most powerful company in the world. And when that most powerful company in the world says, we're going to crush all the things that you've used to create, creators don't say, wow, that's cool, look at how much I can do with the iPad. They say, oh my God, this powerful technological behemoth is coming to take away all the things I love, and they actually can. It's a giant misstep.
It really is. I agree with everything he said. And I think if I had looked at that ad, I know we're saying, if only I had done it. I'm sounding like Howard Schultz now. But I got I gotta say that there are some fundamental things about creativity, and one of the most fundamental things about creativity is that the opposite of creativity is destruction.
Yeah.
We can create or we can destroy. The to use destruction as a way to sell creativity, maybe not the best concept.
Well put. Yes, I think that's right. So we have these two things going on in the world of marketing right now, which are fascinating in and of themselves, and we can have strong opinions one way or the other, and we'd love to hear yours, so put them in the comments. But what do we think the through line here is? What's the theme that you can put around both these things and pull them together?
Well, it certainly is hard for a company, especially a company that's innovative, that's creative, that's breaking ground in new categories. That's a kind of instigator brand that we read about in like Adam Morgan's Eat Big Fish, that pushing against a convention.
Yeah.
It's very hard for a brand to push against convention successfully once it becomes mature and becomes a market leader. Both of these brands started out as the outsider, thumbing their nose and literally lifting a finger to IBM, Microsoft on the Apple case, Starbucks to everybody else in the category because there wasn't anything like them in the past.
Yeah.
And both of them are now the leader in their categories. And their behavior has to change. And they need to understand that their grown-up persona needs to be a little different.
Yeah, so interesting, isn't it? The idea that you are not who you were, and there may be a core of who you were that needs to always be at the center of what your company is. But the way you bring that core to life, the behavior that you do to activate that core, those core values, has to change over time. And as you change it over time, you have to acknowledge that the way people see your brand and the way they interpret that core can dramatically change over time, especially to your point, if you're the one who came in and completely disrupted this category. You're not going to be seen the same way you were. And that means it may be a bad idea for Howard Schultz to say, hey, let's get back to our roots as the third place. This business has changed. So let's activate the core of Starbucks in a way that acknowledges the change in that business. And then in the Apple case, you're the most powerful brand in the world. You're not the technological upstart. People are not going to react to you crushing all the means of creativity the way they might have 20 years ago. Be very careful. So in an interesting way,
Great
these two
lesson.
disconnected things are different manifestations of a similar phenomenon.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody for tuning into a cold take. And Kelly and I will be back as soon as we find something interesting to talk about in the marketing world, which will probably be a matter of hours, not days.
Probably so.